Hey everybody, it's Friday, and this is How to Restart a Church, a spin-off podcast where I, Pastor Trey Comstock, my friend and colleague, Pastor Emily Larson, and very often now, very cool guests, talk about how to make church happen, again, and in this case, how to do it right, how to be a healthy church, and how to be a healthy religious person in the modern world. So I'll throw to Emily to introduce our amazing guest.
I am very excited to have on our show today a social psychologist and professor who has gotten to study a lot of the things that we've talked about before, but with real empirical data behind it, which you know our love of numbers and statistics and data. Now we get to look more deeply at this phenomenon of not the nuns, but the duns. So introducing Professor Daryl Van Tongeren, take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So happy to be here and have a conversation with you. So I'm a professor of psychology at Hope College, which is in Holland, Michigan. I've been a professor there since 2012. And really my research focuses on really big ideas, things you shouldn't talk about at parties, like meaning in life or religion or things like humility. And so what I try to do is I try to bring empirical science to bear on deep questions of what it means to be human and what it means to find and cultivate a flourishing life. And so maybe for about the past, 7-8 years, a lot of my research has been looking at the changing religious landscape in America, and particularly the high number of people who are leaving religion. So we've heard a lot about the rise of the nuns, right? These are the people who indicate no religious affiliation. I'm really interested in the rise of the duns.
Yeah.
So the people who at one time were religious, but now they're done with religion.
And so what got you on this research track? Like, how do you end up in a space where you study, meaning making and kind of the intersection of religion and psychology? Like, how does this end up being your field?
So a lot of my research approached religion from a meaning-based perspective. So the approach I took goes something like this. All of us have to come to terms with some pretty big existential questions in life.
Amen.
What happens to me after I die? What's the meaning of life?
Mm-hmm.
How do I make decisions and know that they're right? And so I had been studying that pre-tenure. And then once I got tenure, I was with a friend of mine. We were on a run. We were kind of celebrating that I'd gotten tenure. And he said, "What's one thing you've always wanted to study?" I said, "Well, I've always kind of been curious about what happens when people leave religion." Because in my mind, I was just so curious if religion's answering all these deep existential questions, what happens when someone leaves? Because it's not as though those existential questions go away. And could it be the case that those existential questions are even more pressing, more salient, and potentially more harrowing and undermining than before? And so he encouraged me, well, hey, now that you've got tenure, go for it, right? Because this was not an area where a lot of people were trafficking. And working at a religious institution, I was a little nervous about throwing a lot of scholarly time and energy around people leaving religion. But I would have to say it's probably one of my most rewarding and enjoyable areas of research.
That's awesome. So I want to start to dig into what you're seeing in that. And so one of the kind of first kind of major thrust of the book is looking at what is driving the growth of the duns. What is driving this great disengagement? And so you have a wonderful framing of it, the Four Horsemen, wonderful revelation image. And so I'd love for you to unpack a little bit. Obviously, you wrote a whole chunk of a book on it. We could do this all night, but kind of the overview of the dynamic of these Four Horsemen.
Yeah. So thanks for mentioning that. So I wrote a book, Done: How to Flourish After Leaving Religion, just came out this past summer. And I talked about this great...
Congratulations.
Thanks. I talked about this great disillusionment. So people are becoming increasingly disillusioned with their religion for a number of different reasons, and identify 4 primary ones that the data are suggesting. So the first reason why people are leaving religion is because of something I call cultural stagnation. So you might think about this as people are becoming more progressive, but their institutions aren't. So cultural evolution is far outpacing religious values. And so when people say things like, well, my church isn't affirming of LGBTQ, or,
absolutely.
I'm struggling with my church's stance on sexuality or gender, or, my church doesn't care as much about race or social justice. Those are places where they're saying, I'm outgrowing my church. I've outgrown my beliefs. I've got these intellectual questions that my church just isn't answering. So I'm going to leave. So that's the first one. The second one is religious and spiritual abuse or trauma. And so this is when people have either witnessed this abuse or trauma from afar. So for example, the Catholic priest abuse scandals, and people said, I can't be part of that.
Yeah.
Maybe they witnessed their friend experiencing abuse or trauma in their own church. Maybe they themselves have experienced abuse or trauma at the hands of religious leaders, or by people who are claiming to act in religious ways, or because religion told them to. So they say, I can't handle this abuse and trauma, and they leave. The third is what I would call simplistic views of suffering. So when people encounter adversity or suffering or hardship, one might imagine religion's the perfect place to turn, right? Like,
I will tell you, that's the idea.
I'm not a biblical studies scholar, but I'm pretty sure that people have agreed that Job might have been maybe the first book.
Yes. That's certainly the first complete work.
Which is literally, so if we stop and pause for a second, the very first book in the Bible is how do we make sense of suffering?
The suffering.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the ultimate question. How do I make sense of suffering? And what people don't get out of that is, at the end, Job's like, I don't know. Sometimes God's just going to do wild, crazy stuff to you, and you just got to deal with it.
It ends with this. It ends with this remark. Some of this is I have experienced the first two. I have often found myself outgrowing, the religion's understanding of specifically how to love people, and then was just angry enough to stick in and try and make the religion change. And then I've talked about this on air before. We talked this a little before. I have been deeply traumatized by organized religion sometimes, and that has changed my relationship with it for the past 6 years. But what I found really interesting was number 3, was the simplistic view of suffering, because we say things like the fortitude of Job, except Job spends most of that book lamenting, going and like the preceding, where before God answers, I think God starts answering in chapter 38. Doesn't matter. Job has yelled at God, going like, "What the hell, dude? What the hell?" And like, it is this wonderfully nuanced, like, answer.
And the comfort is like, well, God might have made kind of a deal with the devil to say, like, you can go do whatever you want, because I'm sure my man Job is going to hang in there. Like, that's what we take out. But what's so fascinating is that's the reading.
Yeah.
But yet where we are in evangelical America is toxic positivity and the prosperity gospel.
Yes.
Right. Which is, it's in social psychology, the concept is what's called the just world hypothesis. So people get what they deserve. The world is completely fair. That's totally fine if your life is easy and life is going well, because you're like, I'm a good person. I get good things.
Yeah, if I pray hard enough, God really. We happen to be sitting in Houston, Texas, contextually. So just 2 highways away is perhaps a former basketball stadium, home to one of the better coiffed practitioners of this version of the faith. If you just pray hard enough, God really does want you to be happy.
But the problem is that doesn't hold up to lived experience. Right? Because when life goes sideways and tragedy strikes, you have to ask a number of questions. One is, well, bad things happening to me, does that mean I'm a bad person?
Right.
If God is all loving and all powerful and all knowing, did God not know? Is God not powerful enough? Did God not care? Did God cause this? Am I just not that important to God? Is God not real?
Right.
And so, I mean, one of the first take-home messages, if you know, the point of the podcast is how to do church better. One of the first take-home messages is get a better message on suffering.
Yeah, I love that.
This is one of the places where churches should absolutely be crushing the competition. I mean, not to make it, you know, about competition, but
sure, but like,
but still.
we have, you know, we have this whole, like, and even, you know, the New Testament side, like, everyone in the New Testament is suffering all of the time. They are all constantly suffering. We literally believe in a God who came to earth to suffer.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, and then we, you know, for putting on my theologian hat, then we take this like God who suffered and said, well, if you just pray hard enough, God wants you to be happy. And I,
So the problem with suffering is it often makes other people uncomfortable because it undermines their existential and epistemic claims about God. Yeah. So if you're suffering and something terrible happens, so for example, when I was 27 or 28, I think, it was 27. My brother passed away tragically. He was 34 years old. He had 3 kids under the age of 6. Yeah. What they said was, you know, oh, well, God really needed an angel. And I said, no, those kids really needed a dad.
Dad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? And so the problem is it makes other people feel uncomfortable because they start having these questions about, well, wait, I can't square this with what I've been taught about God. And so what they do is they do a terrible job of comforting. The best thing we learned from Job you can do if someone's suffering is just sit next to them. Yeah. Just hang out with them, be a practical presence. You know, don't say like, are you sure you didn't do something to deserve this? Just sit next to him.
Like Job's terrible friends do?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Or his wife. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You just hang out next to Job and you're like, dude, this sucks. Should we get a beer now or Chipotle now? Like you know, which one do you want to do? So the church needs to do a much better job of having a richer view of suffering. And I'm going to go a step further by saying I would love to see pastors and church leaders have a stronger dose of intellectual humility when it comes to suffering. And when people say, why is it that suffering exists? Realize that this has been a question that has plagued philosophers and the smartest people that have ever lived for millennia. So maybe you can say, I don't know. I don't know why suffering exists. I can't solve the problem of theodicy in a sermon with 4 points that all start with the letter W. And so instead, I'm just going to say it's an unknowable thing. And yet I can still take comfort in the fact that God suffers with us. Yeah. That's the only thing that gives me comfort. Not trying to figure out, you know, what God's next move is and what I did to deserve this, but just knowing that God suffers with us. So number 3, simplistic views of suffering. Number 4, it's kind of a sociological, social reason, and it's a problematic label. So some people just don't want to be labeled as religious because of the connotation or meaning that religion, or in the United States post 2016, evangelical has taken on. Yeah. So there was a poll that was done 2 years ago that showed 40% of self-identified evangelicals do not believe in the deity of Jesus. Okay. I'm pretty sure that's the only thing you needed to affirm to be an evangelical is that Jesus is God.
Jesus, so
what that's suggesting to me is that for at least 2/5 of card-carrying evangelicals, it's more of a socio-political term than it is a religious one. And so some people are saying, I want distance from that. I can't be that anymore. Right. So I'm stepping away.
I mean, we literally when we launched this project in its current form as the Divine Revisions Code, we put out, we are, plucky people. We put out our manifesto. It's literally, I think that the video file is labeled manifesto.mp4. And in manifesto.mp4 is, we say directly, we're Christians, but we're not like that. And we're really tired of saying that. We are really tired of having to say we are Christians, but not like that. Because I feel that problematic label I try to be not just a pastor, but like a human who lives in a society of other people that are, I want to like live and move. I want to get on airplanes. I want to go to the movies. I want to eat at restaurants, right? I want to be able to survive the dinner party where someone asks, what do you do for a living? And sometimes when I just want to not deal with it, I say I work in media, which is technically true. It is a lie. It is also true. Because I feel that problematic label very heavily of, oh, you're a pastor, and then everyone stops swearing, which I wish they would not do. And everyone, and then also this image of all of these other things I believe about LGBTQ people, about who I voted for, about none of which are true, by the way, but like that label immediately carries that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for some people, they said, "Look, I can go find my spiritual connection. I can meet my deep existential needs elsewhere. I don't need this label." And so, and I don't need an organization or institution kind of directing or dictating me. So I mean, those are the four big reasons why people are leaving. I remember the first time I was in a group. It was with social scientists. It was with some theologians. It was with some pastors and church leaders. And one church leader heard, that the number of religious people was decreasing, and he said, "Good." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And he was like, "Yeah, wheat from the chaff, my man, wheat from the chaff. Better to run out the kind of the unfaithful or the wishy-washy or the lukewarm, and what we really will have is the righteous remnant." I'm not sure that's what's going on. I'm not sure that actually I'm pretty confident that it's not that you're just losing the wishy-washy, that you're losing the uncommitted. Most of the people I talk to who have left religion were so sold on it. I mean, completely in 100% lifestyle choices, big behavioral decisions, where they went to college, whom they married, what they did for their profession. And when they're leaving in their 30s and 40s, it's like a crisis, because what happens if where you went to college, what you majored in, whom you married, when you married that person, whether or not you had kids, what you're doing for a profession, all those things were based on a set of values or beliefs you no longer hold.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's not someone who's wishy-washy. That's someone who was all in, and now they're kind of ticked off, and they need to try to make sense of where they fit and how they can connect spiritually and socially amid a set of organized and traditional religious structures that really just don't suit them or meet their needs anymore.
There was a documentary I watched, on Netflix about folks who had lived in a super Orthodox Jewish community in New York. And then for a lot of reasons, several of your four horsemen ended up leaving Orthodox Judaism, which in that kind of very rigid structure, that's your whole world, right? That's everybody you know. That is how you dress. It is, your entire weekly schedule. And there was the most powerful scene in the documentary is all of these people who have left Orthodox Judaism doing the Passover Seder together. And now it is that kind of moment of the whole documentary has been following this. I should figure out the name of this thing because I think about it a lot. But the whole documentary has followed the trauma of leaving and the pain that comes from kind of going through this deconstruction process of being done. And then seeing this moment of the beginning of new meaning making, of new connection, of new community, of that starting to be rebuilt. I thought it was, that is, look, everybody I know, it's just about everybody I know I'm in church, right? I can absolutely conceptualize this world where what happens when all of that turns off. Because you have realized that this set of values, for a number of reasons, is no longer going to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Emily, go ahead, please.
Oh, well, so I am curious. We use the analogy often of, there are prophets who speak outside of the temple walls for reform, and those who speak within temple walls, speaking for reform. And so we would be sort of the latter. We would be, within the temple walls still. But I am curious, how do you approach those in the church with this conversation from this collective of Duns who have broken up with religion, essentially saying, it's not me, it's you, right? Who have looked at the church and said, yeah, no, it's not us, this is no longer for us, right? Who've broken up with the dogma. How can you delicately and kindly approach those who have dug their heels in, I suppose, within the temple walls?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I mean, I want to say that's like $1 million question, but that's probably a low ball. Like it's probably need a few more zeros on that.
Yeah.
So for churches who are honestly serious about this, right? Who are honestly serious about having this conversation, I start with a few things, and I have to say you have to start first with some humility.
Yeah.
Like you have to have the willingness to hear not just what I'm saying. I'm not the one. I'm just the messenger, right?
Yeah, you're just the telling the data story.
Yeah,
right.
I'm just communicating what thousands of people, and we have done. Like I want to be clear, we have gathered data from thousands of people from several countries: United States, Netherlands, Hong Kong, New Zealand, United Kingdom. Right, we're talking like all over the world, thousands of people. We're just reporting back those data. So the first thing is, these are what the data are saying. I'm inviting you to take a humble posture and to be open-minded and allow this evidence to sway you. The second thing I'm going to ask them to do, and this is really hard, is to actually be accountable for what they did. Okay.
Yes.
People don't make up that they were abused and traumatized in church. Most people just want to go hear the service, do the thing, go to lunch, right? Go to whatever. So it did happen. It is happening. There needs to be some account taken for the part that they played. Those two are already, although those are basic, and we haven't even gotten to doing the work, those are super heavy lifts.
Right.
Because,
which doesn't speak well of us.
Right.
Right, because again, theoretically, if we run the structure of the belief system, humility, and being willing to confess and ask forgiveness, which is I'm just translating into theological language, that is at the core of who we believe who we state ourselves to be.
Right.
Yes.
These are like
We
core
should really
tenets
be
of the
better
faith.
at that by now.
Yes.
Yeah.
But one of the problems in American evangelical churches is an overfixation on correct belief and an underemphasis on living out the practice.
Yeah.
So there is somehow wormed its way into evangelical Christianity in America, the idea that any means are necessary and justifiable if what you are doing is defending your belief. And so I can do whatever I want as long as I get you to know that my belief is right and your belief is wrong, which is absolutely, if you look at the Bible, the antithesis of what Jesus did. Jesus never said, believe this. Jesus said, do this. Jesus was all about, he was about practice and he was about trust. Practice and trust. Jesus was never like, let me tell you about the canons of Dort, my good man. Right?
Quite the opposite, in fact.
In fact, and when Jesus went back and forth with people, it was not about their ideological worldview or their epistemological network, all the stuff that we, spend all this hoity-toity time. It's about, are you being kind, compassionate, gracious, forgiving, the fruits of the Spirit, right? It wasn't like the fruits of right thinking. It was literally, how can you act in a Christian way? So American evangelicalism has somehow justified that a certain set of beliefs will allow people to commit any number of atrocities in the name of their defense. And so flipping that, what we need to say is, if you are actually caring deeply, and in your view, if you think that these people who have left are lost, and I'm not sure that they are, but even if you think that they are,
but if that's your assumption,
there's a wonderful parable about leaving 99 of your friends behind so you can go get that other one that you might consider to be a lost sheep, that is the more admirable, that is the more Christian, that is the more godly, loving thing to do. So once you get through humility, once you get through some accountability, then they have to be willing to say, okay, well, what can we actually change?
Sure.
Right. Low-hanging fruit, stop abusing and traumatizing your people.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
that's
Okay. Yeah.
super low-hanging. That should be checked.
Be good.
First,
do no harm.
Yeah. Don't let power corrupt you. Make sure you're holding your leaders accountable.
Yeah.
Don't do fishy things that would never pass at a secular place's HR policy. Right? Like, don't do any.
Have an HR policy.
Have an HR policy. Then you kind of crawl up to like, well, what about simplistic views of suffering? You probably need to get a little bit more robust theology there, or take a big dose of the intellectual humility pill and say, I don't know, there's a God that suffers with us. Let's just be practically good to people who are experiencing these horrible things. I think the sticking points are around cultural stagnation.
Yeah.
And the problematic label. I think that sometimes when I've come down to this, churches will say, yeah, but we're right in the fact that their progressive beliefs are shifting. They're wrong, and they're kind of outside of orthodoxy. And if that means that they're no longer in the fold, then they're no longer in the fold. And I mean, those are challenging questions. Those are not easy to solve. I wouldn't presuppose that I could offer a solution.
Well, that's the constant. I mean, that's the constant dance of the faith through the centuries, right?
Yeah.
Of what is sacred, what is unchangeable. If, as a faith, we make a claim that there is something about this, and I don't. I am far from the most orthodox person as to what I believe is the core of this. But even I believe that, in my progressive self, that there is like some core of this that is sacred and true and that needs to be protected. Well, within the heart of, every Christian theologian at some point is there is something that is sacred and there are some things that are okay, of like understanding that that's culture and context and whatever. And that is always the wrestle. And we watch, the New Testament wrestles with this. A lot of the New Testament is like, a lot of Acts of the Apostles is, how do we be Roman and Christian? How can we do this? And Tim and Luke is kind of trying to tell the story of like, no, it's okay. You can be a Roman citizen and you can be Christian. These two things are compatible. They feel like they might be incompatible. They are actually compatible. Like this is the dance, and sometimes we've done well, and we're in a season where largely we are not doing well at it. But that is the great story of Jesuit missionaries going to China, a country that does not make wine from grapes, and opening up a grape vineyard so that they could have wine for communion. Now, drinking wine has no cultural context at that point in China. They know other fermented beverages that would have been on their daily table. But in one view of the faith, what the literal elements themselves are part of what's eternal. And so we must make vineyards in China.
Yeah, and so those are tricky. Those are tricky things as to where people and faith leaders draw their non-negotiables. I tend to kind of, as someone who also studies humility, and kind of the range of things that I research, I tend to think that we probably have too many non-negotiables as humans. My sense is if you have more than you can hold on one hand, that might be too many. Because what I think happens is what I call kind of increased moral sacralization. So there's this idea where we start thinking that every issue is morally sacrosanct, right? Yeah. So like we like there are certain things we would probably all agree on, right? Like it would be really really immoral to go like kick a puppy. We're like, oh yeah, you can't kick a puppy. Nobody would want to kick a puppy, right? That's immoral. But then people start making many things that are peripheral or tertiary, and they elevate them to non-negotiables.
Yes.
right? Even when they may not be non-negotiable. Maybe these are things you're like, well, I don't know. So I have a colleague, David Myers. I really, really admire him. He believes two things. He's a Reformed person, so kind of from the Reformed faith. And he says, these are two things I believe. There's a God. It's not me and it's not you.
Okay.
That's it.
This is pretty good. Yeah.
Right. And so he says,
good place to be.
yeah, everything else is up for evaluation and renegotiation, right? Because he has a faith and he says it's reformed and ever reforming.
Yeah.
And so what that means is it can always be updated. It can always be changed because he has a belief in an actual living God, right? So one where it's relational, that what maybe I believed and what I found to be true before in the past, I'm finding new ways toward truth and new ways of relating with God that's meeting my needs.
We love the New Testament. Like, we love those stories in the New Testament, right? There's something that comes up a lot on this show is Peter and eating the unclean animals. It's this great scene in Acts where like Peter he's encountered these Gentiles that are definitely like on fire for God. It's all going great, but like that undoes like all this orthodoxy, and God gives Peter this vision of like, eat the unclean animals. And Peter's like, by no means, Lord, I will not eat the unclean animals. And God's like, eat the stupid animals. Let's get to work. Like, and we have the theological resources for exactly that. We just don't use them.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in that kind of, okay, so let's say that we have gotten to that place where we as an institution, we as a local church, we as a something have said, okay, we're going to take this process seriously. We're going to attempt, in the ways that we can, like, the problem of clergy abuse is so large, no one of us can solve it. We can at least do our part to not continue it. How do we engage in these conversations? Like, what are on an individual interpersonal level? Like, what are these conversations with folks who are done? How do we be a healthy, essentially, how do we be a resource for them? Like, how do we be a part of that conversation?
Yeah. Absolutely. These are great questions, and these might be uncomfortable answers. So
great. Please.
Some of the research I found is that when people leave, they're pretty sure that they're done.
Yeah.
And so what I would want to make sure is that the primary motivation for engaging with people who have left religion is not merely just to reconvert them or bring them back to the church.
Hey, you want to come back? You want to come back?
Right.
You want to come back?
Try our church. It's different, right?
Yeah, we're better.
We're better than that one over there, right?
So if it's actually and genuinely motivated out of love, then you should want what's best for that person.
Right.
And you would want to love that person regardless. And there are going to be some people, especially those who have experienced considerable abuse or trauma, for whom the data are clear, remaining in church is not going to be a healthy thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so one could take a perspective that God is bigger than that, and there are other pathways of relational spiritual connection that they could achieve outside of the walls of church. So
this box of which they have been literally tortured.
Right. So we so I want to make sure that the motivation is purely and completely love and charity, and not trying to bring them back or reconvert them or anything like that. So that's the first thing. The second is then related to that would be to validate the pain that they've gone through, to validate what they're experiencing, and realizing they may be quite happy. They may also be grieving, right? They may be angry. They may be relieved, right? There's going to be a range of emotions that people have after they leave. But probably what they need are people who are willing to listen to them and genuinely be their friend without any ulterior motives. I think a very helpful thing is to ask and then listen and then be quiet when they're speaking. So like, hey, what was it that made you depart? And then shut up and listen and allow them to tell you, not be like, well, we didn't actually do that.
Try to rules lawyer it. Yeah.
Right. Like, we have a much thicker, theology on suffering. You probably weren't paying attention. Like, that's
you
just
flunked the class.
Yeah, that's just going to send folks away.
Awful.
So to actually listen, and then to take that as information. So it's kind of funny. When you write a book, you get some feedback, a lot of feedback. And one of the things about writing is if the reader misunderstands something, by default, that is my fault.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm the author, it's my responsibility to make sure whatever I write is clearly understood by the reader. So by definition, that's on me if the reader misunderstands. If we flip that around, by definition, if something's going on in the church that someone misunderstands through a message, through a sermon, by definition, that's on the church because
that's on this side of the ball, not that side of the ball.
That's exactly right. Their responsibility is to communicate clearly, to make sure they're meeting the needs of their congregation. So by definition, listen to people, and if they didn't feel connected, if they felt hurt, if they didn't feel understood, by definition, they're right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's information to take. And then I think this is kind of an existential moment for churches. My prediction is that people will continue to meet their spiritual needs. I don't think that we're just going to decide that existential questions are no longer important to us. I just think that a number of people are going to do it outside of organized religion. And so that's incredibly threatening, right? That would be like if we told grocery stores that we were going to go back to, planting our own crops and foraging our
everybody's
own
individual plot farming.
Everyone's a homesteader, and we wanted people at the local grocery store to be cool with that. Because what that might mean is that some of what is going on in the churches may no longer be as necessary for as many people. That I'm not saying that churches are no longer going to be necessary. I'm not saying that the capital C church is going to go away. I find that unlikely, but I do think for some people, what they're hearing is, wait, you don't need me as much. And I think the answer, according to what people are saying, is, they don't.
No, they don't.
At least not in the ways that they've been trying to meet those needs.
Well, and this is where it can be very easy as I am, church leader who is responsible for a budget, right? I employ people. I keep lights on. I pay building insurance, which is not getting any cheaper. We've done a whole episode about how church insurance is killing churches. And so it is I understand that that pain and fear deeply, because in the end, right, I live in a house owned by a church. Right? Like, this is, on a, you're gonna talk about existential challenges. It is but that we are not gonna love people well, genuinely love people well, if what we're being motivated by the fact that, we start making the moves that a dying brand makes, right? That we start thinking of ourselves as a business entity, right? Like I spend 50% of my life dealing with the business of church, right? I don't want to downplay the business concerns, but it is easy to, and I this is like a spiritual discipline within myself to try and my best to not let that creep into these conversations about people who aren't going to church anymore, who are done with us for, again, very important and often reasons entirely our fault. Because it can be really easy to step into I need to do whatever is going to get I need to do the thing, say the thing, that's whatever's going to get people back into this institution. And the truth is why we do the show is the institution itself has to evolve. Yeah. To understand this world we live in now.
And that's the thing. So what the kind of the last place that I leave churches with is this possibility. And some of them get really nervous about it because people don't like change, and religious people particularly don't like change.
Oh.
There's a possibility that actually what we're seeing is a huge spiritual evolution.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. kind of akin to the Great Awakening, or akin to some major sociological religious event in which we look back and we're like, whoa, there was before, there was the after. Remember the Reformation? That was wild. Now there's this. I really think it could be something like that. And if churches aren't willing to entertain that possibility and say, might we need to change in some way? It would be like after they invented the steam locomotive, they were like, yeah, but have you heard of the covered wagon? You know,
like, we made it better. We've made it slightly better.
Yeah, we can get you there in 4 months. And they're like, well, or I could get there in 5 days with this fancy locomotive. So I think attending to the realization that this could be a completely brand new spiritual evolution, this could be a brand new revolution of religion, and demonstrating maybe just a tiny bit of trust in this living God we may profess to believe in.
Yep, that's the theory.
And have a relationship with that. Hey, if God and the church has survived all these twists and turns, right? Every 1,000 or 500 years, you know, we decide we're just going to, new branch over here. Sorry, Orthodox, you know, we're going over here. Oh, sorry, Catholicism. It's been another 500. You know, looking at the watch, it's like, well, you know, maybe something else is going to happen. And so I think demonstrating that trust and faith, I think for many people, their view of God is too small.
Yeah.
And I think that having a larger view of God marked more by trust and less by fear and dogma and getting your beliefs right and more by a relational engagement, a set of beliefs that are grounded in intellectual humility of saying, it's okay that I don't know, and that's okay. But I'm going to trust anyway. I work at a place called Hope College, and it could possibly be that hope is this defiant act of bravery, right?
Yeah.
Like to actually hope that something is going to come out of this that's even stronger and more lovely and more aligned with God's vision for the world is scary, and it defies logic. But it also is participatory, and it requires churches to do something to bring about that vision that's not what they've always done, and not waiting for someone else to do it. Because otherwise, I think that is how you drift into obsolescence.
Yeah. Or in some case, drive ourselves as fast as humanly possible into obsolescence. We got really, I think Christianity in the United States got really used to winning, right? It just got used to being the single biggest cultural thing. It helps that this gets fueled by the Cold War, and a great way to be a good American was not to be a godless communist, right? There were other external non-theological factors that fuel this. But we had, we as the church had a pretty good run in this country of beating the odds and staying massive. On my drive here, I currently don't work where the studio is. I drove by 5 United Methodist churches within 20 miles, right? It's just and I wasn't actually bothering to count the churches of other denominations. Just I know that one. On my less than 20-mile drive here.
Yeah. And
we got used to that being the state of affairs, and it is deeply disquieting that is probably not the state of affairs going forward. But yeah, there is this literal leap of faith we've got to make.
Yeah. Yeah. And toward that end, living in a very, very small town that has over 100 churches. You can kind of look from one church to see another church.
Yeah.
Yep.
Kind of,
I used to pastor in a town of 1,100 people, and there were more than a dozen churches. And my joke was that when we got to 100 in membership, I said, well, we're good. We have our share of the town. We have our allotment. We have, if there are 12 churches for the 1,100 of us, we have enough.
Yeah, and that's with 100% church attendance. That's
right, yes.
That's doing pretty well.
That county is probably pretty close, but, it's small town Texas.
And like you're saying, I think that, American Christianity has enjoyed a particular cultural power and privilege that is probably unprecedented in many parts of the world. And it certainly wasn't the case when you're reading the Bible that, Christians were, running for office and,
Right.
holding positions of great stature based on their Christianity and being able to influence things. And yet, again, none of that seemed to matter. In fact, all of that, again, just in my reading, all of that just seems so antithetical to
Yeah.
Christ's message. They're like, yeah, we get this whole thing, but you're like a political leader, right? And he was like, I'm not. Can I go back to sleep
Right.
now?
Yeah, can I take a nap? I'm okay.
Yeah.
I was resting. This is my theory that Jesus is an introvert. That this is not related to anything. My theory is that Jesus is an introvert. The number of times Jesus is trying to get away from the crowd to take a nap is remarkable.
I know, honestly. He's like, gosh, humans, man, they can be
Just
the
give me-
worst sometimes. They can just
Give
be
me
the
a
worst.
break.
Yeah.
But we talked. We did some post-election lamentation, and one of the things we reflected on with that is like in Christ's temptation, he is offered like earthly political power, right? Satan takes him up and says, "Hey, it's the Darth Vader pitch. We can rule this. We can rule this as father and son, right? Like it is like literally Darth Vader to Luke Skywalker." And Jesus goes, "Yeah, I'm not going to do that." The whole thing is, it's grounded in, a God who came as a baby, like, which is like this
Humility.
incredibly humiliating.
Humility,
It's
yeah.
a God who willingly humiliated God's self for the sake of us, and then we got really used to winning culturally, and it leaves us like largely as a movement unprepared for this moment that we have helped create.
So we were talking a little bit before the show. I would love for you to share a little bit about what you have coming down the pipeline next that's come out of this research, this new branch that you're working on with your wife, right?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So my wife is a therapist and a licensed clinical social worker. And so we are together working on a book project for a book for the American Psychological Association on helping to train therapists, train clinicians who are seeing clients who are undergoing religious change. So basically, because of this great disillusionment, and even people who don't necessarily leave religion, but they experience a period of deconstruction or reconstruction or reconfiguring, that's very disorienting, right? It's
Yes.
destabilizing. You're in this period of disequilibrium. But a lot of therapists might not be religious or fully appreciate the role that religion plays in many people's lives. And so this is trying to help create a framework that can better prepare clinicians to do that good work with their clients, right? And this, we find this especially to be necessary for those people who are seeing clients who have experienced religious abuse and trauma, right? People who really need to be qualified to walk with people through some of those deep hurts, and to understand the role that religion has played. So we're working on that. Our goal is to have that finished, at least a full draft of the manuscript by this summer, and so hopefully it would be out next year.
Yeah. So my in a previous life, I was a public health researcher doing similar work in the public health side, right? So public health, even beyond mental health, like public health, religion has this huge impact on public health. And often public health as a field looks at that and goes, yeah, it's a bunch of mumbo jumbo. And I'm like, yes, you're not all wrong, but also it is, we did a lot of work around particularly around sexual reproductive health but it is impacting the decisions that people make relative to their sexual and reproductive health. So to figure out how to have those conversations to engage, there's a lot of profound wisdom in psychology and in public health and in those practitioners, but also even in this great disillusionment, we live in a world in which religion has either for positive or negative profoundly impacted people, and being able to navigate that, I think, is really, really helpful.
Yeah.
So do you have anything you want to plug? It's going on till late, and we could talk about this literally all day. Do you have anything you want, other than you've got this book coming, and that's awesome, anything specifically you want to plug before we close out here?
Yeah, so the book done, How to Flourish After Leaving Religion, and then Emily, you mentioned the work my wife does. She's a licensed clinical therapist. She has a group called the Flourishing Collective. A number of her therapists do see clients who are undergoing religious change. And so, check that out.
Yeah, we'll put links down in the show notes too.
That's perfect. Yeah, and just really encouraging church members and church leaders to take serious this work and allow this to open up and invite conversations about how they can better meet the needs of not only the people who have left, but also the people who are in their congregations, who are in their communities, perhaps before they leave. And really use this as an opportunity to ask deep questions about why are we doing what we're doing, and are there ways that we can do it better?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for being on with us. For you at home, thank you as well for joining us. We are the Divine Provisions Co., and as ever, we need your help. Like, comment, subscribe, leave 5-star reviews on Apple Podcast. All of that helps the false gods of the algorithms to help us a little bit, and so help us out, friends. Helps this work go further, helps us be more sustainable. If you want more of what we do, it's at Divine Provisions Co. on most things. On YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, it's and Blue Sky, it's at Divine Provisions Co. On TikTok, for now, it is Divine Provisions and the letter C. That is Divine Provisions and the letter C. If you would like to support us financially, shows and studio moves and all these things cost money. You can help us out. Go to our website, divineprovisions.co. And go in peace to love and serve the Lord. We'll see you next time.